Welcome back to My Most Authentic Life. My name is Fede. Today we're joined by Lucy Flores. We're going to hear her incredible, brave, and courageous life journey. A brush with death reinforced her commitment to live an authentic life. And during those moments of crisis and deep reflection, she said to herself, "If I'm done with life, I think I've done it right." What a beautiful affirmation of a life fully lived. Lucy is a former Nevada State Assemblywoman, former candidate for Congress. She's a lawyer and media entrepreneur. She is the co-founder of her own digital media brand, Loose Media, producing digital content which focuses on the expanding and influential US-based Latina community. Lucy is a national leader, having served on the DNC Unity Commission, the board of Our Revolution, and the national board of the Women's March. She also provides commentary on national media outlets and speaks throughout the country on both political matters and digital media strategies. Lucy continues to advocate heavily for women's rights, immigration reform, and criminal justice reform. She's a powerhouse and inspiring Latina voice, and this is how she's navigated and triumphed through adversity. Lucy, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. And you have a remarkable life story that has taken a lot of twists and turns over the last couple of years. And just very recently, you had an anniversary that we're going to talk about today. Why don't we just get right into it and tell us the anniversary that you celebrated quite recently over the weekend?
Sure. Yes, the life story is very long. It's been quite a few ups and downs, really my entire life, which makes this last couple of years really interesting because it really has felt like a bit of an onslaught. And in this last year, actually just on Friday, I celebrated a 1-year anniversary. I don't necessarily know it was a celebration, but in many ways it is a celebration because I'm still here. But it was an acknowledgement of the day that I was sent to the emergency room by my doctor because they weren't sure if I had a potential aneurysm in the middle of my chest. And so off to the ER I went, and they confirmed that, in fact, I did have a very rare, potentially fatal aneurysm sitting just above my heart. And that launched a whole series of events for the next 6 months as we determined if a couple of things. One, if I was at risk of dying in the immediate. Once they determined that I was fairly safe, that all of the expert minds felt that I probably wasn't going to die in the immediate, they needed to figure out if the aneurysm needed to be repaired, and if so, how they were going to do it, because its location is so rare. One, there's no real case studies on anyone having it done before. And two, because of that, there's just no real approach to how to repair it. And if they did repair it, there is a number of different ways, all of them dangerous, all of them with all of these potential side effects, not to mention permanent disability, possible loss of my vocal cords. I mean, you name it, there's these massive potentials. And of course, the possibility of dying. So it took us 6 months to determine if, in fact, it needed to be repaired. And on December 14th, the verdict was that no, that it was small enough for me. I was healthy enough. We had to run all the tests, mapped out my entire biological system, my cardiovascular system, et cetera, and determined that it was something that I could monitor. And hopefully, it's a small enough size to where if it stays that way, I could possibly just live with it for the rest of my life. So yesterday or Friday, depending on, of course, when people are listening to this podcast, but just a few days ago is when that 1 year anniversary of that date occurred. And, as I said, it's really amazing. As you live your life every single day, we don't normally spend a lot of time thinking about what a year from now will look like and what could possibly transpire. And so that really opened my mind up to certainly a lot of revelations, about life and how I was living it, and how your future, your day, your life can change in the blink of a moment. And this isn't to scare anyone, of course, but just to really we have all these really kind of cheap sayings, live in the moment, carpe diem. You see them on people's bathrooms, right? Like on the walls as bathroom decorations. But it actually is, if you internalize that and you actually live that bathroom decoration, it's real. It actually is very real, because our lives can change at any age in the blink of an eye. And so that's what this weekend really was about.
Wow, what a powerful story. And I know as we were prepping for this, that set off a chain reaction of other events that we'll get into. But what was the immediate reaction in that moment? The shock factor. How were you able to manage those emotions?
Well, it was really interesting, because when I left the ER, the emergency room doctor had said, it should be okay. We don't think you're in any immediate danger, but you do need to go see a vascular surgeon immediately. So they got me fast tracked into an appointment with the best vascular surgeon that we could find in Austin. I ended up having to travel to Houston later on to see other world-renowned vascular surgeons, which I would, of course, really, really fortunate to be able to do, and very privileged to be able to do that. But as I waited those 3 days for that initial appointment, it was a lot of processing. It was a lot of wondering. It was a lot of what's even going to happen. It was immediate life planning. I ended up, the day I went to the emergency room, I'm a lawyer, and as lawyers do, we often don't take our own advice. So I don't have a will. And I had property at the time and other assets. I don't have any kids either, which is, probably the biggest reason why I never prioritized that. But that being said, everyone should have a will. So please get a will if you don't have one. And so I remember texting my brother, telling him what was happening, and literally sending him my pins and passcodes, and said, take everything. Should anything happen, just drain everything, take everything, because if not, it's going to get stuck in probate. And that's the first thing that my mind went to, and then after I left the ER, it really was just a lot of processing initially. But then I remember after I went to my first vascular surgeon appointment, and he says to me, we just don't know. And we're going to have to keep conferring on this, and just the whole question mark hanging above my head. And I think that oftentimes when people go through these traumatic medical diagnosis, the question factor is just as stressful as the knowing factor, because at least if you know there's a plan and you can move forward with something. But when there's all these questions, you really just can't do anything other than wait and wonder. And I cried a lot the first week, just cried. And I remember thinking to myself that I didn't know why I was crying, because I legitimately felt in those first couple of days in that first week, that I was actually not scared. And it was really, as I processed all of that in my mind, I just kept saying, if I'm not scared to die, why am I crying? Why am I so upset? And I realized that the whole thing kind of led me to a couple of conclusions. That one, I was deeply, deeply, profoundly sad for those people who love me. And just knowing how much grief and pain they would go through made me, I'm a very deep empath. So I feel people, I think, more deeply than others. And that made me so sad. But the other part that I realized was that I was actually okay with dying. And that made me think through my life. You know, you reflect on your life and how you've lived it up until that point. And I realized in that moment that what I was going through was also validating how I had chosen to live my life up until that moment. And that lifestyle of living was always in service of my truth, in service of what I thought my purpose was here, and making decisions that weren't always hard, that weren't always easy, that were often uncomfortable, but that were true to me and what I felt was the right thing to do and what was going to bring me the most joy and the most satisfaction in my purpose and the way that I was living my life. And I was actually really happy about that. You know, it was like this weird emotional roller coaster where while I was really, really sad about potentially having to leave everyone, at the same time, I was really ready to go. And I was really satisfied with what I had accomplished in the way that I had lived my life up until then. And then I started to think, you know, wow, what a testament to not only my own ability to live this way, but also like how lucky am I to be this age and still be young and feel fully satisfied. And in that moment, I really started thinking, how can I convey this to other people? How can others know? And how can they have that moment without having to face death? You know, well, so I was going to say, so that if you ask that question, are you ready to die today? How many of us can say yes? Like fully deep down inside in your heart, how many people can say yes? And I think that's a beautiful thing when people can get to a point where they can deep down, truly and honestly say yes.
Absolutely. And I think there's so many powerful aspects of your story. I'm just going to read something that you wrote on your post from your anniversary. And it speaks to what you've just been saying. You said, because when my day finally does come, just like I felt a year ago, I'll be comfortable in departing with no regrets. And my wish is that every single one of you can leave this world on those terms. It's just so beautiful.
Yeah.
And it makes me think just, about like the core of this podcast is to live your most authentic life. And we're so lucky to be able to enjoy it. But when you come face to face with the situation you did, it just makes you appreciate it. I can't even empathize having not gone through something like that on a totally different level. So tell us about how you got to the root of appreciating your most authentic life through this experience.
I think it was because I was almost forced into reflection. You know, when you are facing death, and everyone has a different experience. Of course, I can only speak to mine. But I think that you are really just forced into this moment where you take stock of your entire life and what you've done. And if you've done enough, if you have any regrets, all of those things just come to the forefront. And I think that so often when we don't have those life moments, we just don't stop. We don't stop to think about it. We don't stop to reflect. We don't question whether or not we are in alignment with our life purpose. We continue sacrificing and doing things that we don't want to do because that's what society tells us, or because we feel like that's an imposed obligation, or because they're family obligations, or because our parents say we should do a certain thing, or our spouse says we should do a certain thing. But how often are we living our lives and making decisions based on what other people want? And how often do people tell themselves, well, I'll just do this now, and next month I can do something different, or next week I can do something different, or next year. I just have to do this for another year, another 2 years. And I'm not talking about sacrifices like that improve yourself. Like, we always sacrifice for going to school or getting an education or a skill set, building a skill set, or just going through things that we don't necessarily love, but that we know is in service of our purpose. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about living a life and making decisions that isn't in alignment with your purpose and your joy and your happiness. And you're doing those things because others dictate those things for you. And we don't really stop to question it. And we just assume. And most of the time we're right. Most of the time we do have a tomorrow. And most of the time we do have a next week. And most of the time we have a next year. But how many times do we not? How many times have we regretted, if you've ever experienced this, a family member passing or a friend passing or something horrible happening to someone, and you regretted that last moment when you knew you wanted to express something to them, you wanted to apologize, you wanted to say you love them, you say, I wish I would have said. Well, don't wish you would have said. If you're thinking about someone, send them that text. If you love someone, tell them they love you or you love them. Like it really is about, again, the bathroom walls decoration saying, living in the moment.
Yeah.
But without having to face death, to really take the time to take stock of that. Like that's I guess what was at the crux of that post, that message that I wrote, was that I really truly wish that for everyone, to be able to face death or face that question any day, and for everyone to be able to say, yeah, I'm happy with the decisions that I've made. And yeah, I don't feel any regret.
That's so beautifully put. And in preparation for this interview, I've just been so aware, and it's brought front and center all those values that I now appreciate through my journey to my most authentic life. And over the weekend, I was hanging out with my mom, and I've been living away from. It was Father's Day, so my stepdad and my mom, and just taking those moments of gratitude to be in the moment and think back at the years when I gave so much for everything else but them.
Right.
Corporate career, friendships, and not taking the time to enjoy them. Right. And there's another layer, because there's so much happened with your story. There's another layer with you as well, that as this was happening, you had also very sadly lost your father as well.
I was just thinking about that, because that was another moment where I made decisions knowing that it was the right thing. And again, the final moments I was able to have with my father. So Sunday, yes, it was a very kind of heavy weekend, emotionally heavy weekend for me. Friday was the anniversary. Sunday was Father's Day. It's been just over 2 years since I last lost my dad. And anyone who knows my story, you can Google my name, Lucy Flores. And my dad was the central figure in my life, my entire life. My mother left my family when I was 9. My dad raised me. He put up with a whole lot of everything. He sacrificed his life in order to try to give me the best possible opportunity. And so he was my person, and not having that person anymore, of course, has been really hard. And on Sunday, I, was again reflecting on, again, this idea of doing the right thing that's aligned with what you know to be right for yourself, and figuring out the rest later, and knowing that the number one positive thing from that approach is that you will never regret the things that you did. And oftentimes you actually end up regretting the things that you didn't. And so with my dad, it was during the pandemic, and he was in assisted living at that point. And I remember one day I saw him, I was able to visit with him on an iPad, and he just was not in a good place. And I just said to myself, enough, this, I will not allow this. And I, from one day to the next, decided to early terminate my lease and my LA apartment, put all of my stuff in storage, figure out, I own my own company. So figure out staffing changes. I didn't know where I was going to get the money to pay for the staff that I needed so that I could step away. I didn't know anything. I needed to hire a full-time in-home nurse because I needed to have him home. His one desire, his one wish in life, since I could remember, was that he wanted to die in his house. His house, as an immigrant from Mexico, owning his own house was like his biggest accomplishment in life. And he wanted to die in that house. And I was going to figure out how to make that happen. And I did. And to this day, I still don't know how I did it. It's just, the things that you need to do are in front of you, and you set out to start doing those, and the things just begin to align. And so I ended up spending the last almost 3 months with him in Las Vegas in his home. And I was able to spend those final moments with him. And to this day, there was a ton of sacrifice. That's why I say it's not so much about not sacrificing or never experiencing challenging things, or, that things aren't going to be hard. It's not that at all. It's about, are you sacrificing for the right reasons? Are they aligned with your purpose and your heart and your journey and what you were meant to be doing in that moment? And I knew that no matter what, that was what I was meant to be doing in that moment. And I'll never regret any of that, despite the fact that it was really, really, really hard. And I did sacrifice so much. And all of my half brothers and sisters and my full brothers and sisters were able to spend those final moments with him. And it was all because of me, because of the decisions that I made in that moment, not having any clue of how I was going to make it happen. So, that, I think that's just, again, it was like another example of being at peace with how you decide to figure out every moment of your life. And when you and I were talking about this, we were doing a pre-conversation. One of the things that it came up to me was that, we, in this like kind of health / wellness / empowerment, like, that whole space, we often hear people talk about how you just need to be happy and you need to be full of joy, and things are just, if it's not feeling right, then don't do it. And it's like, actually, that life is a little more complicated than that, right?
It's not always going to feel right.
That's right. It's not always going to feel like, rose-colored glasses. Sometimes reality is going to hit, and it's going to be really hard, and it's going to be really depressing, and you're going to feel very lonely. And that's when you need a system. That's when you need your friends, your family, whoever. Like, I don't have much family left anymore. But I have chosen family, and I've made some of those chosen family members in Playa del Carmen, where you and I met. And so it's like, I think it's really important to emphasize that you can face that last moment, and you can face it with full satisfaction. And yes, some of those moments are not going to be fun, and they are going to be very painful, and they're going to be challenging and difficult. But once you sum it all out, the aggregate of it all, it's always going to land you on the other side. You're always going to be in that side of satisfaction.
Yeah, well, it's amazing what the seasons of life can bring us. And those low points are equally as important to shape our future. With the situation with your dad, and it's also amazing the things that we're capable of when we're short on time, and how amazing that you were able to move mountains and spend 3 months with him, and how beautiful for you that you're able to look back on that now and say you gave it your best and that you had those moments with him. In these situations, I've heard that this will obviously dramatically change your life perspective. Uh, what, how has this impacted your life perspective, and what gifts have been unearthed from coming face to face with your mortality?
I think more than anything, it is just confirmed in the most universal way possible that I can trust myself, that I should never doubt myself, that even when you're feeling self-doubt and even when you feel like you might not be making the right decision, if you know it to be your truth, if that is the thing that, because we all know, I think it's really interesting when I hear people start to make excuses, or they'll say, well, it's because of that, or it's because of this, or, and people know, no matter how often they try to be self-delusional and they try to do mental gymnastics to justify whatever it is they're doing, right? That's keeping them in that same stagnant, no progress, unhappy. I've often referred to it as comfortable discomfort or comfortable unhappiness. People that are not too miserable, but not really happy either, just kind of there.
Well, it's funny, sorry to interrupt you, but you just hit on something. I was literally preparing for another episode, and what's been top of mind, and it's interesting you're just saying that today as we're recording this, is that living a comfortable lie versus an uncomfortable truth. That's exactly what you were saying right there.
And that's right. And your heart and your spirit is always going to know that. So, because you feel it, and, if people want to stay there, by all means, stay there. Right. But don't try to lie about it. And I mean, sure, I guess people have to lie about it in order to be able to stay there. Right. And everyone is going to make their own choices. And I find it sad, that people will live so much of their life in this state of comfortable discomfort. And I just can't help but think to myself, what a disservice people are doing to themselves because they're unwilling to put themselves first, to, make some hard decisions sometimes, to experience some discomfort as they move into a new era, like so many reasons. And I truly do I feel bad for them because I know what they're missing out on. But at the same time, we can only focus on ourselves, right? And hope that maybe one day someone will listen to something. Maybe they'll listen to this podcast and they'll get inspired and, decide to live their best and fullest lives. But I think that for me, that was the biggest takeaway, is that there just isn't any reason for it. If we have just a little bit of courage to move forward in a way that speaks to your heart, the dividends of that, the outcome of that is always, always, always going to end up with a fulfillment. It is going to end up with a joyous spirit. And hopefully later, rather than sooner, when you do face your own mortality, you will be able to say, yeah, I'm ready. That was a good run.
That's the best way. That's the best spot to be in. Did you ever have you asked yourself why the universe put these challenges, these roadblocks there for you?
I think it was to discover my own power. It was to discover that I could trust myself, to evolve my inner voice, to learn. I think that in these last couple of years, and certainly throughout my entire life, therapy, of course, has helped, because you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to figure out the universe's questions all on your own. But I do see purpose and challenge. And I do believe that that your spirit is here to do something, and everyone's journey is different. And I believe that when you need to learn something about yourself or how you approach life or whatever it is, I believe that our calling in life is to pursue happiness. I do believe that. And I think that the universe, when it needs to teach you a lesson, it will continue bringing these lessons, and they will manifest themselves in all kinds of different ways until you finally learn those lessons. And I do think that in this last year, I needed to learn a lot of lessons. And a lot of those were because I was like, things about my business, things about relationships, learning to depend on others, because I was so fiercely independent, obviously from my trauma of being abandoned, my abandonment wounds and all of the trauma I had experienced. My dad was obviously the most amazing person he could possibly be with what he had, but he was working all the time, and I had 11 brothers and sisters. Not all of them were in the house, but he was an immigrant, and he was just trying to keep us clothed and fed. So giving emotional support and showing love as a Latino man from Mexico was not his nature. So, there was a lot left to be desired. And, again, you don't start to uncover these things unless you do therapy or you do some work on yourself or those kinds of things. So the point is that in order for you to progress as a human in the best way possible for yourself and for others, you have to unearth these things. And sometimes that is going to come from these challenges that the universe puts in front of you. And that, as I said, can manifest in so many different ways. It can manifest in a person, in a relationship, there's just so many different ways. So the biggest thing for me is, and also discovering patience, because just because something is happening to you doesn't mean that you need to immediately figure out the why. The why is going to present itself. If you just allow yourself to exercise your muscles in how you deal with that situation and the choices that you make, those muscles are going to get stronger. And eventually you are going to learn the lesson. And sometimes you won't figure out what that was until a year, 2 years, even 5 years later, who knows? And sometimes it's immediate. Sometimes you're just like, oh, I know exactly what this is trying to teach me. So it is really interesting. But I would say that is really the biggest thing, was that I feel like I just, I've needed to evolve, and we never stop evolving, ever. The person who thinks that they're perfect and that they've learned everything is probably the least perfect amongst us.
Well, there was another lesson that you learned through all of this, because you've been, I guess, through a 2+ year life-changing chapter of your life. They say things come in threes. You mentioned your business a bit earlier on, that during this period as well, you brought back from bankruptcy.
Yeah.
You said that you're a phoenix that has risen many times over.
Yes.
So...
And I am ready to stop rising. I'm good. I feel like this is good. This is the last time. This is the last iteration of the phoenix that I need to be.
And yeah, so tell us a bit about that, about, as this was happening, also having to rescue your business.
Well, I think what was happening also in retrospect, now that I've had some time to process, I didn't get the good news from the doctor until mid-December of 2022. So it's really only been 6 months. And I was in Playa del Carmen. I flew out the very next day after I got that news, which was the perfect place and the perfect time and the perfect everything to be, because Playa del Carmen is such a healing, special place with special people in it. And I was amongst friends and people who loved me. And, it was just really, it was the perfect place to be, to begin healing internally and emotionally, and from the stress of all of the previous 6 months. And I really had disassociated pretty severely, where I just put my attention in every other place but my business. I didn't make any changes to staffing, for example, and I just saw money hemorrhaging, and I did nothing to stop it. And I think in retrospect, when I reflect on that, that's all I had the capacity to do at that moment. And so there's a lot of forgiving yourself and giving yourself grace as well, in acknowledging that we're all doing the best that we can with what we have. And it just wasn't a priority, despite the fact that I'm not even going to say it should have been. There's in no scenario could it have been priority based on the circumstances that I was in. So once I got the news that I was going to be okay, I immediately turned my focus to my business and was like, holy cow, it was like destruction everywhere. It was like, whoa, this place is on fire. Like, I have no money. I'm in debt. I owe back taxes. Like, oh my God, where am I going to find the money to do this? I finally got the courage, like 2 months later, to email my investors and let them know exactly what was going on, like nothing withheld. And I got the most amazing response, which was, we don't care about the money. We do care about the money, but we really don't. And we just want you to be well. And we will do whatever it takes to support you, wiping off the debt from your books. If you decide to reorganize in some other way, we just want you to be well. And
what a boost of support, huh?
Yeah, it was incredible. But it was just like a continuous boost of support, because it was also one of the learnings that I don't think I closed the loop on, was this hyper independence and never relying on anyone else. And that was one of the lessons I needed to learn, was that people want to support you. They want to be there for you. They want to love you. And we often don't let them in for all kinds of different reasons. And I had lived my life that way in such a long time, that it was really hard for me to accept that support, even in those moments where I was facing this possible death. It was still so hard for me to accept support. And so it really was just like this. It was an onslaught of challenge, but it was also an onslaught of love and kindness and support. And I'll obviously never.
And learning to receive.
I am a much different person now than I was certainly a year ago. And so that's what I've spent the last really about, I'd say since February, March, April, May, June, about 5 months now, rebuilding my business and bringing it off the brink. And another anniversary thing that was happening this weekend was a graduation from a media accelerator that I randomly applied to, because again, I was just kind of doing things willy-nilly. And when I got the acceptance there, I literally almost deleted the email, because I was just so used to getting bad news that I was like, oh, it's just another denial. But it actually, literally the subject line said congratulations in like all caps, but I didn't even bother to read it. I didn't realize that I'd gotten accepted into this accelerator until like a couple of days after I received the email, when it really just occurred to me to be like, wait, what did that email say? And then
so that happened this weekend?
And that happened this weekend as well.
So okay. So there's some
Like,
good news. Some good news this weekend.
Oh, absolutely. No, there's been plenty of good news.
Yeah.
Like it's all kind of been sprinkled throughout. And so being able, and that really has been what has sustained me through all of this, But if I hadn't opened my heart, if I hadn't accepted that people wanted to help me and that I needed to focus on receiving, I wouldn't be where I am. Right. And so I think that's one of the most valuable lessons that I did learn, in addition to many others, of course. And that came with an infusion of capital. We ended up having to prepare a pitch where I pitched in front of an entire room full of advertisers. That was like this incredible opportunity for us. I mean, this accelerator it's called the Bomisi Accelerator, has been such an incredible opportunity. And frankly, one of the reasons why Loose is also simultaneously rising from the ashes, which is pretty, I think, appropriate based on the name, right? Loose means light in Spanish.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
So it sounds like June for you is going to be a milestone every year that you will remember,
I think
for
so.
good and
Yeah.
bad.
I think so. But mostly good. Mostly good. Because again, it really is what was I able to take from all of that? And I would argue that I was able to take mostly good from all of those things, despite the situations themselves being really, really, really bad.
Well, I love listening to your story and just listening to it again in this setting. I've just been reflecting a lot, and it's so important that people like you share your stories because it makes you appreciative. As I've been listening, I've been getting a sense of gratitude about everything that's good in my life.
Yeah,
Just things in
that's right.
perspective.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's so fascinating. And none of this is, the other thing I want to point out is that it's not like this isn't science based. We know what a shift in framing in your mental frame does physically, emotionally, and mentally for you in a positive way. Right there, we have plenty of research on the efficacy of cognitive behavioral therapy, for example. Like, this isn't like some. And if you have crystals and you follow astrology and you believe in the universe and energy, that's good too, right? But the whole point is that this isn't like, oh, just tell yourself it's going to be fine and you'll feel better. No, like it's not that
No,
simple.
it comes with
But
action as well.
that's exactly right. But learning to change your mindset, your frame of the way that you look at things, and turning that into a habit is ultimately and that's that action part, right? That's the saying. And it's not the toxic positivity either,
Exactly.
because that's also a thing, right? Like it's not about that. It is, but it is about being able to see yourself coming out on the other side. And
Yes.
that is a muscle, that is a skill set that you build. And so if anyone listens to this and says, I could never do that, like things are horrible, there's no way, like there's no hope for me. If you keep telling yourself that, then yeah, sure, things are going to be horrible and there is going to be no hope. But if you just open your perspective just a little bit to consider that maybe there is some hope, maybe there is an alternative, maybe there is a solution, and maybe that solution is going to be really hard and maybe it's going to take a long time. Maybe you're not going to find, maybe things are not going to be easier, even under the socioeconomic conditions that so many Americans and really globally people live in. Being a single mom on food, my dad was a single dad he also didn't want to ask for help. So we often didn't even have the benefit of food stamps. And, like I remember being hungry and he was a gardener and he would bring edible weeds from people's homes, like rich people's homes. And he would feed us those. And by the way, they were really delicious. But but as a kid, yeah, no, they were so good. They're basically like greens, but they were weeds. And because he was from the rancho, he knew how to live off the land. But obviously as a kid, that does something to you, right? Like experiencing that poverty, et cetera. So I get it. Like it's not about just telling people you're going to be fine. Just tell yourself you're going to be fine and you can work through it and, you'll figure it out. No, we have to recognize that some people are in some really, really bad predicaments, and there's racism and there's classism and there's patriarchy and there's all those things that are there, right? But there is no situation under which you cannot figure out some sort of solution, even if it means that solution is going to take you a while.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you said about, the energy of receiving. In any predicament, there's usually an opportunity there to receive. And if you take action at the same time, you mobilize yourself out of that predicament. But just
Right.
sitting there, not in inertia, that won't accomplish anything.
That's exactly right. That is 100% guaranteed to not change anything. So yes.
Well, Lucy, I mean, we could talk for so much longer. I really appreciate you sharing your story today. And I want to start closing off with something that really stuck with me. If for the listeners out there, you want to be on Lucy's side because she will fight for you. That's something that you said that I loved recently. I think it was in that post as well, that you fight for your people. So tell us what that is as we start to close off this interview.
I mean, I was just being really unapologetic about who I am. And I also made sure to note that I'm not for everyone. I love fiercely. I am the ultra optimist. If you are some miserable nihilist who believes that the world is wrong and everything and anything is horrible, you and I are probably not going to get along. Right? Like, I know that I'm not for everyone, and that's okay. Right? Accepting that your energy and who you are and your approach is not for everyone is okay. At the same time, I never apologize for the way that I show up for myself and the way that I show up for my people. And if you're uncomfortable with me expressing to you how much I love you, or how much I appreciate you, or how much I care for you, then you're also not my people. Right? Like, it's, again, you're not going to be for everyone. So I've learned to be unapologetic in who I am. And that doesn't necessarily mean that those people or those situations don't appreciate you. It just means that you're not aligned and that you're not energetically in the same place, So that to me was just like, that's just who I am. I'm proud of that. I will be in those trenches with you. Like, I've been incarcerated before. So if I need to shank somebody, tell me who I need to shank. I will take care of it. Right.
And that's an entirely other episode.
That's a whole other episode. Was my school to prison pipeline and being incarcerated most of my young adult life, but which also taught me some things. But again, it really is like just.
Well, why don't we tell the listeners something about that, just so we don't leave a cliffhanger on that juice one.
Well, after my mom left, I had a lot of issues to deal with, and a community that did not care about helping. I was in a very low income community, predominantly Latino, not a lot of resources. There was obviously more police officers and law enforcement than there were school counselors. And at a time when I really just needed intervention and needed help, instead, the acting out that I was doing as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old ended up getting me arrested and put right into the school to prison pipeline. And so my very first arrest, it probably wasn't my first arrest, but one of the moments I talk about often is as a 12-year-old being strip searched for the very first time after running away from the school resource officer because I was ditching and I obviously didn't want to get caught. And so instead of that resulting in some other type of intervention, I was instead arrested and taken to and incarcerated and put in a detention center. And you're processed in the exact same way that someone who just killed somebody is processed, right? You're fingerprinted, you're shackled, you are put in an orange jumpsuit, you are put in these cinder block, incredibly cold and cruel rooms. And so it really is a dehumanizing process that so many of our kids and that I went through. And that's also results in a lot of lifelong trauma that needs to be unpacked. But yeah, so that was, I spent most of my young adult life in and out of long-term and short-term detention. I served almost a year in what they call a youth camp, but it's basically just a juvenile prison. And by 16, I had dropped out of high school, but I had successfully graduated for parole with this amazing angel that came into my life, which yes, is another, we need to do part 2 of this.
I know
the first part.
I know exactly. No, that's a whole episode in itself, but thank you for describing it so succinctly. it is a dehumanizing process. And I'm so happy that you shared all aspects of your story, our story, the Latino story, the women empowerment story. It needs to be shared. We need to shout it. We need to have megaphones. So I'm very, very grateful that you shared just a little bit of it today, just the start of it. You'll need to come back.
Absolutely. And yeah, absolutely. And, I just want to say, like, if there's one thing that I could tell people to do is just be authentically you, love the way you want to love, care for people the way you want to care for them, advocate for yourself and for others the way you want to advocate. Like, never apologize for how you show up for yourself and how you show up for others. That is what makes you you. And not everyone is going to like that, and that's okay. But ultimately, you are always going to be satisfied with the way in which you have chosen to express yourself and express your love and express your care in those moments. And again, you'll never regret doing that.
Yes, 1000%, 1,000,000%. Life can change in a split second. And I'm sure everyone that's listening has been inspired. I've been really, really inspired and motivated for some reason. I feel motivated after hearing you speak.
Okay.
Lucy,
Well,
thank
I'm
you so
glad.
much for being here today.
Of course, it's my pleasure.
Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.
And that's today's episode. As always, thank you for listening. Have an amazing day and keep on living. Time on.